Venezuela denounced as an act of piracy the U.S. government attack on an oil tanker off the South American nation shores. The Honduran Congress failed to recognize the results of November 30th elections, denouncing the electoral process as fraudulent and condemning foreign interference to influence on the vote. And the Palestinian Ministry of Foreign Affairs urged the international community to implement the United Nations resolutions calling for an end to the Israeli occupation on Palestinian territories. Hello and welcome to From the South. My name is Belén de los Santos. I'm from the teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We'll begin with the news. The United States government claimed responsibility for the attack and the theft on an oil tanker off the coast of Venezuela. This is happening amidst the siege and escalation of threats and aggressions by Washington against the Venezuelan people. In a video released by high-ranking U.S. officials, troops are seen surrounding the cargo ship by air and then boarding it while carrying military weapons. The incident was unveiled by President Donald Trump himself, who stated that the U.S. military might also seize the oil on board the ship. With the attack, the United States government admits to an act of piracy, adding to its criminal records in the Caribbean, which already includes the murder of at least 80 people aboard fishing boats, in addition to the criminal blockade against Venezuela and other countries in the region. And in this context, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela denounced and strongly condemned through a statement these violent actions. The government condemned this new criminal act that adds to the theft of Citgo, an important asset of the strategic patrimony of all Venezuelans, seized through fraudulent judicial mechanisms and outside the bounds of any legal norm. The statement continues by saying that in these circumstances, the true reasons for the prolonged aggression against Venezuela have finally been revealed. It is not migration, it is not drug trafficking, it is not democracy, it is not human rights. It has always been about our natural wealth, or oil, our energy, the resources that belong exclusively to the Venezuelan people. Finally, the statement concludes by saying that the Bolivarian government reaffirms that it will appeal to all existing international bodies to denounce this grave international crime and will defend with absolute determination its sovereignty, its natural resources, and its national dignity. Venezuela will not allow any foreign power to attempt to deprive the Venezuelan people of what belongs to them by historical and constitutional right. In this context, Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel expressed the Caribbean nation's support for Venezuela amid the new aggression perpetrated by the U.S. government. In a statement shared on his social media X, Díaz-Canel reaffirmed Cuba's full support for the statement issued by the Venezuelan government and strongly condemns the assault on an oil tanker in the Caribbean Sea perpetrated by the United States Armed Forces. The head of state stressed the action constitutes an act of piracy, a violation of international law, and an escalation of aggression against the sister nation. And in this context, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Venezuela, Ivan Gil, thanked on Thursday the support of the Cuban head of state. More information on this through a post on his socials. Gil expressed on behalf of President Nicolás Maduro and the Venezuelan people our sincere gratitude for your strong support and forceful condemnation of the recent assault perpetrated by the United States Armed Forces against an oil tanker in the Caribbean Sea. Moreover, the foreign minister of Venezuela stressed that this act of piracy does not only constitute a flagrant violation of international law, but also represent an unacceptable aggression against Venezuela's national sovereignty, right to free trade, and freedom of navigation. He closed by warning that the attack poses a threat to all the peoples of our region, jeopardizing the peace and stability that we value so highly. And the Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro and Russian President Vladimir Putin held a telephone conversation on Thursday to reaffirm their strategic bilateral relations. According to a statement that was released by the Venezuelan government, both heads of state celebrated the results of the recent intergovernmental high-level commission, in the framework of which 19 agreements were signed in all areas of joint work. They also highlighted ongoing preparations to move forward in the joint development plan for 2030. President Maduro underscored the importance of consolidating advances in air and maritime connectivity, and both heads of state vowed to deepen direct flight initiatives as those that are already in place between Venezuela and Moscow or Venezuela and St. Petersburg. For his part, President Putin ratified his full support to the Venezuelan president in his efforts to consolidate peace, political stability, and economic development. He also highlighted that Russia continues to support Venezuela in its struggle to defend its sovereignty, international law, and peace in the region, and puts its diplomatic capacity at the service of strengthening cooperation in all these areas. Meanwhile, on Wednesday, the United States President Donald Trump threatened Colombian President Gustavo Petro amid his brutal attack against countries that have decided to defend their sovereignty and dignity of the Latin American and Caribbean region. At a White House roundtable, Trump declared that he hoped that Petro was listening to him, since he would be the next target of his alleged war on drugs. With these words, the White House tenant resumed his threats against the Colombian leader amidst the tensions generated by extrajudicial executions in the Caribbean and the Pacific, reinforced by the recent pirate attack on a Venezuelan oil tanker. In the scenario, President Petro responded to the threats by stating that the far-right leader is a very misinformed person. Colombian President Gustavo Petro responded to the threats made by U.S. President Donald Trump, whom he described as someone who is very misinformed.
Trump is
a man who is very misinformed about Colombia. It is a shame because he is dismissing the country that knows the most about cocaine trafficking. It seems that his interlocutors are completely deceiving him. There have been more than 1,000 combat operations on the ground, 1,446 combat operations on the ground against the mafias by our military forces and the government. We have carried out 13 bombing raids in an attempt to locate their leaders, using shared military intelligence in many of these battles.
And on Wednesday, the government of Peru confirmed that U.S. military engineers are supporting the relocation of the Peruvian Navy's naval base located in the port of Callao in a project valued at $3 billion. Peru's Foreign Minister Venezuela stated it is a relocation to expand port capacity. However, experts warned that the project could involve the construction of a new U.S. military base on Peruvian territory. At a press conference with foreign correspondents, the minister also referred to his recent visit to the United States, where he met with Secretary of State Marco Rubio to discuss issues of political cooperation, investment in strategic sectors, and regional tensions related to U.S. operations in the Caribbean.
Thank you.
And in the United States, an emergency alert was issued on Wednesday for the state of Washington after an atmospheric river triggered severe flooding. The state governor, Bob Ferguson, assured that the scenario is the result of heavy rainfall that has left large accumulations of water. The situation remains critical in areas near rivers, especially in Skagit County, where more than 75,000 people are on alert for possible evacuation. In this context, the National Weather Service is forecasting up to 20 additional centimeters of rain, which will increase river flows. In this context, the governor requested immediate federal assistance and urged citizens to follow evacuation orders. Now we have a short break coming up, but first, remember you can join us on TikTok at teleSUR English, where you will find news in different formats, news updates, and much more. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. We continue with more information. The Honduran Congress denounced fraud in the country's electoral process and serious foreign interference to influence the vote. The National Congress President Luis Redondo stated that the election process was null, void, and fraudulent, asserting that the cancellation of the mandatory use of the biometric system allowed political parties to manipulate the voting records. In this regard, Redondo also stated that this action constitutes an electoral crime and an usurpation of powers of the Congress, where the state is the only body with the authority to reform the country's electoral law. The irregularities in the electoral process have already been reported on multiple occasions by the Libre Party, which has maintained its position regarding the denunciation of the electoral coup that the country has experienced. And in the statement, Luis Redondo also condemned as an act of coercion the pardon granted by U.S. President Donald Trump to former Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez, who was imprisoned for drug trafficking in the United States.
November 27th and 28th constitute an invisible interference, a direct threat to the Honduran people, marked by flagrant violations of democratic principles and international law, seeking to influence the vote through pressure, disinformation, and economic conditioning, as well as offering a political pardon to a convicted drug trafficker as electoral currency. This represents an unprecedented act of coercion against the sovereignty of a country in the world. It is about our dignity and our self-determination, as well as international law, as established with absolute clarity in the Charter of the Organization of American States.
Also in Honduras, the Liberal Party's presidential candidate Salvador Nasralla joined the voices denouncing an electoral fraud, blaming the company responsible for providing technical support for the election process for tampering with the tally sheets. This way, Nasralla denounced the manipulation of more than 19,000 tally sheets by the company ASD. The candidate's accusation alleged that the company deliberately caused failures in the system to allow the overriding of records with results favorable to the National Party. In this context, Nasralla pointed out that responsibility lies directly with the international company in charge of the system and not entirely on the National Electoral Council. We continue with Honduras as the Armed Forces Chief General Roosevelt Hernandez confirmed on Wednesday that the presidential transition is guaranteed as soon as the electoral body officializes the general elections results. Amid serious allegations of electoral fraud by the country's political and social organizations, the senior official reiterated that the armed forces will guarantee democratic order, as they have done throughout President Xiomara Castro's term. The officer also recognized the good relations with his military counterparts in the United States and said that he had no doubts about President Donald Trump's interference in the electoral process of November 30th. And in other news, the Cuban government established a new mechanism for managing, controlling, and allocating foreign currencies in the country, with measures aimed at stabilizing the island's macroeconomy. The new procedures, published in the nation's official gazette on Thursday, were issued by the Ministry of Economy and Planning and the country's central bank. The new legal norms introduce the possibility of other currencies becoming legal tender alongside the Cuban peso, which means that foreign currencies may be used for collection and payment transactions between economic agents based in Cuba. In this regard, the Ministry of Economy and Planning informed that the new system applies to both domestic and foreign legal entities, individuals engaged in economic activity, local development projects, and international cooperation. And more details on these new economic measures, according to the Cuban Minister of Economy and Planning, Joaquin Alonso Vázquez. He said that this decree law makes foreign currency transactions viable in the country, recalling that during the reorganization task, dollarization was eliminated from the economy and all transactions began to be conducted in Cuban pesos. In this context, the minister assured that the law is based on the experience of the last 10 years of economic activity, stressing that with its implementation, the nation is not building capitalism with the partial dollarization of the economy, but building socialism within the country's own characteristics. In this regard, the president of the Central Bank of Cuba, Juana Lilia Delgado, also stated that with these actions, a temporary deadline has been set since the country has not given up on the goal of restoring a monetary environment in which the Cuban peso is the center of the monetary and financial system. And like this, we have a second short break coming up. But before we invite you to visit our Facebook page at teleSUR English. There you'll be able to watch our top stories, special live coverages, and much more. Follow the page and activate notifications to stay up to date on the world's most recent events. Final short break. Don't go away. Welcome back from the south. We have more information. The Palestinian Ministry of Foreign Affairs urged the international community to immediately implement UN resolutions that are calling for an end to the Israeli occupation and to move forward with the effective recognition of the independent and sovereign Palestinian state. In a statement, the Foreign Ministry warned that the prolonged occupation continues to systematically violate the fundamental rights of the population in the West Bank and Gaza through policies of displacement, repression, and territorial usurpation. The ministry also emphasized that ending these violations and guaranteeing the right to self-determination are indispensable conditions for regional stability, and therefore urged states and the UN to take concrete measures and strengthen international protection of the Palestinian people. In this context, thousands of families in Gaza are facing worsening conditions as Storm Byron batters the region with flash floods, strong winds, and hail as well. Humanitarian workers report that makeshift tent camps have been inundated, leaving residents exposed to the elements. According to the United Nations Office for Palestine, nearly 850,000 people across 761 displacement sites are at severe risk of flooding, with storm water mixing with sewage and solid waste and contaminating refugee areas and forcing families to move in search of dry ground. Aid organizations warned that Israeli restrictions imposed on the entry of tents, tools, and equipment needed to repair water and sanitation systems have compounded the crisis. Relief workers say the inability to bring in essential supplies has left community vulnerable to both the storm's immediate impact and longer-term health risks. And like this, we have come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. Also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, X, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok as well. For teleSUR English, my name is Belén de los Santos. Thank you for watching.